Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. Last time, I read off 3 trivia questions. Now, we're going to give the answers.
Okay, so the first question, what caused Sir Ian McKellen to consider dropping his role as Gandalf in the Hobbit movies?
They used so much CGI and green screen technology in the filming of the Hobbit Trilogy that Sir Ian McKellen had to do scenes entirely by himself in a green room. He hated that style of acting so much that it made him cry on the set.
Oh man, that's horrible. That's kind of, it feels like it's something that would have been written by Tolkien too. The evils of industrialization.
We got it in there early today, folks.
Just compared to, I guess, making the movie that close, though, it was probably, I could imagine that not being fun, though. Like, I don't blame him.
This is an apt example of how progress is actually regress.
Mm-hmm. The second question that you had asked was, how did Bombur manage to run faster than all the other dwarves in the Desolation of Smaug?
In the Desolation of Smaug, as the dwarves are running to Beorn's house from the orcs, the dwarf Bombur runs faster than all of his dwarven companions and makes it to the house first. There had to be some way to film this scene so that the actor could run faster than all his compatriots as well. Mm-hmm. To make the dwarves' movements in general feel more connected to the earth, the dwarves usually wore very heavy prosthetics on their feet. Bombur got to wear ordinary sneakers in the scene running to Beorn's house, which allowed him to run faster than the others.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking like they just pretended to run slower, but the actual physical slowing down by the sneakers, that makes it more of layers and more interesting for sure.
It was being weighed down by prosthetics, and it was sneakers that allowed Bombur to run faster than the other ones who were wearing the prosthetics.
Got it. And then the final question was, which dwarf used real facial hair?
Keely used his own facial hair. Everyone else had artificial beards.
I should have guessed that, but I was hoping it was Balin. Or Balin.
Well, Keely has the most unimpressive facial hair.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that should have been a dead ringer.
So for the main part of our episode today, we're going to be covering the final movie in the Hobbit Trilogy, The Battle of the Five Armies. It
starts off very strong with Smaug attacking Lake Town. Early on, I think the master of Lake Town just forgetting that he says, "Forget the town, save the gold." I felt like it was pretty funny writing. It felt like how Tolkien would do a take on bad leadership.
The Master is definitely an example of bad leadership, for sure. Some of the comments in the Hobbit book that the narrator makes are very funny about the nature of the bad leadership. Yeah.
I think it's kind of weird that in the movie he doesn't have a name. That struck out to me, but...
He doesn't have a name in the book either. He's just the Master.
So eventually it goes to Bard escaping from prison and getting ready to attempt to save the town from Smaug. I think anything that happened with Bard before now was kind of superfluous, and Bard just starting off in jail and coming out and fighting the dragon would have been, I would have liked that kind of like a jump cut introduction to his character. All the stuff in the last story just felt like really unnecessary build up to me.
Yeah, like I've said in the last episode, I'm not sold on the story they gave Bard, but it is my opinion that it was good that they brought him into the second movie. I would have liked to have seen something more motivating for his story in movie 2, but the fact that he was there, I don't think is the problem.
Yeah, I think they just messed up so bad that I picturing in my head it starting in movie 3 Bard. Because honestly, moving forward, I like Bard a lot. In this movie. In the last movie, though, I was just, every time he was on the screen, just waiting for him to cut to the next scene where somebody I cared about. So they did a horrible job of extending him through the story, but I do get wanting to give some context into the hero who slays Smaug as well. I really liked Smaug's depiction here at Lake Town. They did a great job making him terrifying. Especially when he goes from just a dragon attacking to like taunting and speaking to Bard. I quite liked that. But it's pretty cut short because during his taunting, Bard manages to take him down.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of people I've heard didn't like Smaug getting taken down so quickly. It's not, and it doesn't make sense like to start a movie off with such a thing. But I have heard of historically like reference to dragons getting taken down suddenly or leaving suddenly.
So I am exactly one of those people who thinks that Smaug should have died at the end of the last movie rather than the beginning of this movie. The pacing just feels really weird to me to have such a climactic scene to open the movie.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in some of these examples that you say that where dragons are defeated so quickly.
I did some deep digging here. The most accessible example is, even if it's hard fought and at the end, the dragon in Beowulf is suddenly defeated in a climactic battle, but at cost to the hero. I'm not saying like defeating the dragon isn't usually at great cost, which it is, and Lake Town was also that cost, but it's usually like a sudden blow that will take down a dragon in these myths.
I think we're talking about two separate issues here, actually. So I think there's the difference between a single arrow taking down the dragon, which it was that way in the book. And honestly, considering this particular point, I was thinking that perhaps my criticism of the Oliphant being taken out by the ballista in War of the Rohirrim was perhaps a little harsh, since an arrow can apparently take down a dragon, as it happens in the book. But my point is about the division of the movie.
Yeah.
It's less about Smaug going from taking out the town to being dead very quickly with one arrow, and more about the fact that Smaug dies 11 minutes into the movie. You could put those 11 minutes at the end of the last one.
Also in the book, it feels very similar, though, with Smaug dying suddenly. That's one of the main things I remember reading this book so long ago, is the build-up to Smaug, to have him gone and killed basically like off screen. Because a lot of the Hobbit will just have what doesn't happen around Bilbo, like just very briefly described. It felt like he was killed completely off screen.
You mean like the entire Battle of the Five Armies?
Right, the entire Battle of the Five Armies, which is the meat of the movie here. Like, but they to make it a movie, they kind of had to show it. But Smaug is supposed to be a fake out, even though he's big and terrifying. He's not the main climactic event for The Hobbit, in my opinion. And I think that's kind of what the movie was going for here. It might have still been more interesting to have him just wrapped up in the desolation of Smaug, and then to have the Battle of the Five Armies just be about the Battle of the Five Armies. I'm not saying there's not some merit to that argument. And also, if you haven't read the book at all, it definitely would be very weird to kind of see like Smaug die 11 minutes in. Yeah,
just the pacing feels weird to me. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, I can't completely argue with it, but I think for me it was nice. I liked it. It was close to the fake out that I felt when I read Smaug just getting killed by some guy who was not mentioned before that page.
I think that's a great reason to like it, though. Yeah.
Afterwards, it does show the aftermath real quick. I thought it was well done. The people of Lake Town, this is a recurring theme, but they get a lot of scenes that are gratuitously showing them like just laying in agony. But after this, it shows Gandalf and Radagast captured and chanting, and they aren't very clear on what's going on with their mumbling in a cage.
Yeah, I put all of our ideas about the White Council and Sauron and that whole storyline, I put it all together here.
So we're going to be cutting back and forth. Well, in the movie, this would be cutting back and forth.
In the movie, this is peppered out throughout the movie, but we're just going to talk about all the White Council, Sauron, Ringwraith stuff here.
Right.
So yeah, Gandalf and Radagast are chanting, and it's based on the orc's line, "Spells will not save you, old man." I conclude that they were trying to work some kind of magic. I don't think that the movie makes it very clear what they were trying to do exactly.
Yeah, the demeanor and tone almost reminded me of like prayer.
Magic is pretty divine in The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
A lot of the power comes from Iluvatar, the god. Mm-hmm. So,
And then, so after the orc says this line, spells will not save you, Gandalf is absolutely getting, he gets his butt kicked by this orc. You know, he's just he's being flung around, and I get he's supposed to be weakened, but I don't even understand why he'd be weakened.
The movie really wants us to care about these orcs, but I just can't. My generous take is that it is true that Hobbit book Gandalf sometimes seems to struggle more with some confrontations than Lord of the Rings book Gandalf the Grey. Like the goblins and the wargs pinning them up in the trees seems like a minor inconvenience compared with killing a Balrog.
Yeah. I mean, killing the Balrog was very, very difficult for him too, though. I'm wondering if there's some sort of implied power scale between the two, works.
I can't invest in these Hobbit orcs, I'm sorry. I don't really care about them.
No, I definitely get that sentiment. I think the orcs are fun when they're fighting the dwarves, but fighting Gandalf is just, I don't know, very weird.
And you got Legolas and that one orc that have the showdown throughout the entire trilogy, and it's weird.
Again, the beef between the orcs and the dwarves felt good, natural, and real. Everything else was weird.
Yeah, exactly.
I do like when Galadriel comes out and this orc that is torturing Gandalf says she'll destroy him. I thought it was going to amp up for a really cool fight, but like she like taps him and he's disintegrated. That was absolutely I was blown away seeing that. It was really fun to see something just so one-sided happen.
Yeah.
I was not expecting it at all. The fight scene does amp up. It does have some more things that I did enjoy. I like seeing Saruman, being a good guy here.
And, I mean, he is fighting with the good guys, and I guess he hasn't started his industrialization yet.
No.
But he's also not exactly a good guy the way the movies are implying that he's got designs to get the Ring of Power already.
Yeah, from what I got from his arc here is it was highlighting how he became evil, but he's not quite there. It was just showing he had the maybe a perchance for or the tendencies that will lead him to doing evil.
Yeah, he certainly hasn't gotten his entire evil arc going yet.
No, it's still fermenting at this point.
That's a good word.
Elrond shows up as well, and he also is shown taking down some orcs and fighting pretty well. And I really did actually kind of like this scene because it shows the big players in the Lord of the Rings trilogy who are just making political plays. They're talking a lot. They're not really on the front lines actually fighting. And Elrond, Galadriel, Saruman were all implied to be powerful, but never shown very much to be.
I can see that. Elrond does get a battle sequence in the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
He's leading his armies.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of things where, it's kind of like in real life, I suppose, like the further up you get the chain of the command, the longer you've been in something, the less likely you're actually to see combat or anything like that. And it makes sense more that they'd be, like, it's not like that it's dishonorable, it's just that it doesn't make sense for them to be on the front lines because they're dealing with 100 other things back home. That's why they need the heroes of the Fellowship of the Ring to go out and do it. It allows the Fellowship of the Ring to exist. But it's just nice to know, like, they had their own heroic journeys back in the day. It definitely felt like that watching the movies, and I felt like this was a good depiction of a bit of that.
One of the criticisms I had of this fight was that it's really only other ring bearers who seem to be able to notice the 3 elven rings. Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf each have elven rings, and only other ring bearers are going to see that. And the movie had an orc notice it. An orc would never be able to notice that these guys had their elven rings.
Yeah, the implications of all of what's going on here with the issues with the ring wraiths and the rings in the prequel trilogy just disappearing makes very little sense. Like you said, like it just doesn't seem to have a continuity is the problem.
It's already a soft magic system, and yet they managed to break every rule of the soft magic system.
Yeah. Well, they kind of broke it by making it more seem like a hard magic system, I feel like.
And then they fleshed it out poorly, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. As they're fighting off the ring wraiths, I think they do they completely defeat them?
I got the impression they like banished them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're not like truly gone for good, as we know. Sauron starts to appear, and I feel like this also, like, again, with knowing Peter Jackson's a horror director really helped me understand just how a lot of this is done, why a lot of the decisions were made. If just coming from that mind, like, the tension does always feel like a horror movie a lot of times, and this scene had a lot of those vibes for me, with Sauron appearing and Galadriel having some, like, body horror as she is banishing him. It definitely was freaky to look at.
Yeah. I just keep getting hung up on the mechanics of how this is playing out, because this isn't how a ringwraith fight would go down. They
took some liberties with how the ringwraiths worked, and you do have to, like, you either have to miss it completely or just accept it, and then you can, but, like, that is definitely a bigger priority, I feel like, of something to note for sure, if they're just changing how ringwraiths work completely.
That's how it feels like. And then there's also the practical issue that, they all barely fought off 9 ringwraiths, and Saruman thinks he can take on Sauron solo, and everyone believes this.
Power scaling's weird in Lord of the Rings in general, I feel like. And also with Gandalf getting beat by the orc, and also in the book getting pushed back, but also taking on a Balrog. Like, it feels like often these characters are just as strong as they need to be for that moment, which kind of, in a way, does reinforce that soft magic system, though, at the same time.
That's a fair point.
But in this instance, it's like 1 second to the next. They just got had a very big struggle with those 9 ringwraiths, and now they're taking on the big bad, and Saruman's ready to do it one-on-one. It's kind of...
it's a little immediate.
It just makes Sauron seem like headstrong, which isn't a characteristic I would normally give him. Like, he's cocky, but not to the point where it's illogical. He's more logical than he is self-assured.
Yeah.
And it makes him seem like just self-assured, throwing caution to the wind, which just feels out of character for him there, for sure.
He might do something incautious, but it would be for what he, in the moment, thinks is a good reason.
Yeah. And then, so after all of this is resolved and they temporarily banish Sauron, Gandalf is off to go to the Battle of the Five Armies. Radagast gives him his staff, and I am a little confused about, like, I know, so what exactly does that all entail in this world?
This is a movie thing. Staffs do figure into the books, but exactly what their role is and how important they are isn't well defined in the books. The movies really play up the staff, as it makes sense that they would. In the movie, Gandalf had his staff broken in Dol Guldur by Sauron, so now he doesn't have a staff. And so Radagast gives him his staff so that he has one for the rest of this movie and actually the beginning of The Lord of the Rings as well. So this is the staff that Gandalf will take into Moria when he falls to the Balrog. They wanted to give the staff a backstory, I guess, maybe.
That makes sense, yeah.
Whether they wanted to or not, they did.
Like, I don't think the staff was very iconic, though. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some people really think it is. But, like, I feel like it's such an odd thing, an odd detail.
How do you mean?
Like, Gandalf's staff from the first movie, I feel like did not need a backstory.
I didn't think it needed one. But it got one.
Yeah, I don't hate it, but it's just, it feels like it was given a lot of weight, and I don't get why.
It's not the worst part of the Hobbit trilogy.
No, it is not. It cuts it back to, well, more like as this is going on, the dwarves are barricading themselves, right?
So we have the issues of Thorin and the Arkenstone going on at the same time as we have this White Council plot going on. Mm-hmm. One of the things I noticed was that the ring and the Arkenstone are parallels in this. The Arkenstone bestows power. That's how Balin describes the stone in the dragon sickness scene. The Arkenstone bestows power on the possessor in the form of the right to be king of the dwarves, and the ring bestows its own power on the bearer, of course. So this means that Bilbo just has a habit of finding magic artifacts, rings, stones of power, stuff like that, apparently.
He's like a magnet to those things. Does the Arkenstone have specific, like, corruption power like the rings do?
Not in the book.
But?
Well, I think you might be able to make the case in the movie that there's a certain corrupting tendency because the Arkenstone is conferring power, and power corrupts.
Right, and so it's different in the books that the Arkenstone was less of a plot point, like, from the beginning.
The Arkenstone was the pinnacle of the treasure. It wasn't a political artifact.
Yeah, I guess it was almost like a representation of the entire horde, basically.
Yeah, in the book, it was just the piece de resistance of the treasure. But it wasn't actually important in bestowing power. It was just pretty and very valuable, but it had no cultural significance the way the movie has assigned it to be the possessor of the stone is king of the dwarves. Yeah,
and so in the movie, the Arkenstone does have an actual like magical effect, or is it just the horde that was like rested on by the dragon?
The treasure has the dragon sickness on it, and the Arkenstone is part of that treasure. I don't know that we have enough evidence to say one way or another how much of the treasure you need to be around to get the dragon sickness.
Yeah. Thorin, like he had a few traits that made him a questionable person to follow as it is, but Bilbo at this point is definitely getting way more than he's signed on for.
Yeah, poor Bilbo.
I really feel for the hobbits in all of these movies. I do feel like they didn't really need a ailment like dragon sickness. I feel like Thorin's character did have enough hints and all the necessary precursors to just have him go mad with power once he actually is at the finish line. Is my personal opinion. But this might be a critique on the book too, I think.
Yeah, we can definitely take a look at it when we get there in the book and see what role the dragon sickness plays. There have been adaptational liberties taken. I kind of like how the dragon sickness serves to conceptualize what might be the madness that is otherwise set up. There are readings of Tolkien's works which have little to even no magic ever involved.
Yeah.
A lot of the magic can often be explained through some other means. And this could be one of those things. Is dragon sickness actually a thing? Or is it just because Thorin was set up to go mad the entire time?
Yeah. And that's another interesting thing about like the soft magic system. Like the dragon laying on the gold actually gave it the power, or is it just the cultural connotations of that? I don't know. I do like the like back and forth and them calling it a dragon sickness, but at the same time, like they could have just had Thorin go mad and I would have bought that too without any of that extra additional context. But it's Tolkien, so there is extra context, of course.
And you can always choose to believe that dragon sickness is just a cultural way to explain the madness that otherwise came on him. Cultures often have vastly different ways to explain mental illness. Yeah, very true. Dragon sickness sounds like it might be the dwarvish way to explain this particular mental illness.
Yeah, and I don't know, it really does feel like it could be either too, and that's the fun part of a lot of this stuff. I like when it's like ambiguous. That always gives a lot to play within your head.
Yeah. And I really like how Richard Armitage plays the dragon sickness. I really like that ray of sanity that comes through with Bilbo and the acorn. It was just acted really well.
I thought that scene was like one of the most impressive scenes for Martin Freeman to embody Bilbo too. So like just the way he was acting, his facial expressions, his tone, his demeanor felt super like, very on the nose for what Bilbo should be like.
They both did really great. It was just Thorin really stood out to me.
Yeah.
But Martin Freeman was awesome as well.
If I had to nominate best scene of this entire movie, it might be that one.
I might agree with you. I do like the scene with Bilbo and Bofur.
Oh, right. Yeah, that one's good too.
I'll point it out when we come up to it.
Right.
So then there's negotiations, and then, as Gimli says, well, I guess that concludes negotiations. The people of Lake Town find themselves in the same position that Thorin and his people were in when Thranduil wouldn't help. And now Thorin is passing along the same actions that Thranduil did to his people. Thorin is not helping the people of Lake Town who have become homeless. Thranduil didn't help the dwarves who had been found homeless either. Both at Smaug's behest.
Yeah, that's interesting how you'd think he would relate to something like that. And again, if it wasn't for the dragon sickness, he may have, but it's hard to say. So in this scene, it does set up having all of the parties interested in the treasure specifically. And it does this by having the elves interested in an artifact, a necklace.
Yes.
And I feel like, I don't know, the mountain and the positioning that Gandalf was mentioning was all that was the elves were interested in originally, and what most of war was actually over. Like the treasure was just an afterthought, a minor thing compared to the actual position of the keep. But I don't know, I feel like it was pretty unnecessary to throw an artifact that the elves were specifically interested in.
The Hobbit book doesn't have them interested in any specific artifact. Mm-hmm. The Elven King is interested in the treasure, and he wants what he thinks is his share of the treasure.
Yeah.
But the necklace is a movie innovation. This necklace reminds me of a necklace from the Silmarillion, mm-hmm. but this necklace would not be that necklace. It just evokes the feeling of that necklace in me.
Yeah, and there is something to say, like, all of the specific factions want only, like, one specific piece of the treasure might make sense to kind of, like, say, oh, we're not just fighting for the treasure, we're fighting for this specific artifact more, but also the treasure. But, you know, treasure and a keep are just, they're compelling reasons enough, like I said. As Thranduil, right? He's the one who explains this?
Thranduil.
Bard decides that he needs to talk it out because he realizes there's more people interested in this. I like that Bard is like, hold on before we go and attack. Let's just go and ask first, right? But Thorin says he has no actual obligation, basically, because he was making his promise under duress. He had no choice but to barter his birthright. Now, I do think that having to do that in being compelled is forced to is a very interesting and compelling reason to go back on a promise, but it's still very wrong.
Yeah. Breaking your word is never going to get you into good places in a good Tolkien story.
Yeah.
And I actually really liked the other half of this, that because you gave us your word is the best reason that Bard could provide for why Thorin should give them the treasure.
Right. Yeah. And so as the dwarves are in there and they're talking about not wanting to give up their birthright, they're literally destroying the statues, to barricade the tower. They're knocking them off to make a gate of some sort. And this made me think of the Beowulf essay that we discussed a few episodes back, where Tolkien talked about deconstructing a tower for your own use. And then I guess in the last movie, them melting the statue also qualifies. They're destroying the aesthetic function of their birthright, despite it being the whole reason that they're fighting.
Yeah, the tower from the essay was deconstructing it to look for historical meaning that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And while I don't see that particular application in this myself, I do see this as an interesting study on ends and means.
Yeah.
The end is to reclaim their birthright, but the means to doing so that they are choosing is to destroy it along the way. And that's pretty questionable, to destroy the thing that you are trying to get to.
Yeah, it's like you may as well just skip the whole fight and just, like, you're already losing it by fighting.
Right. The evil of the fight is taking away the birthright inherently.
And then also he said that he refuses to part with a single coin. Really, really makes me laugh, because the whole point of coins is their currency. You exchange them for things that you actually want. Yeah,
it's pretty ironic.
So they're destroying their birthright to defend their birthright, and they're hoarding treasure instead of just paying these people off to leave them alone.
Thorin does give away a mithril coat. They say that no blade can pierce this mithril coat. And I say that it's a good thing this applies to arrows too, unlike Smaug's armor, where if no blade can pierce it, an arrow can pierce it. Here, no blade can pierce it, and it deflects arrows besides.
Yeah, it was a very specific arrow, though. So the scene we mentioned earlier with Beaufort and Bilbo here, I was just thinking, like, at this particular moment that Bilbo just needs to leave and get out of there. And Beaufort very subtly hints at Bilbo doing just that in on the night watch. He says something like, we're changing guard now. There won't be anybody up here for a good 20 minutes if you need to do anything.
Yeah. And this was the scene that I would also be thinking about for favorite scene of the movie. I really liked this one. I think this scene really personalizes Beaufort. Mm-hmm. We talked about this earlier, that 13 dwarves, most of whom don't even have a speaking part in the book, trying to translate that to a film medium is very difficult.
Right.
And I find that this scene is a very charming way to give a lot of characterization to an otherwise faceless dwarf.
Yeah. I don't even remember the name Beaufort, but, from the book. But he's like in the top 5 characters in the movie, I feel like, in terms of like screen time and importance in this extended edition.
Yeah, and this scene is an extended scene. I really liked it. This was one of those significant extended scenes to me.
Right, yeah, definitely.
The scene also gives Beaufort's later go, when he tells Bilbo to go, very dramatically, some extra context.
Yeah, this is a weird one to cut for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really liked this one. This one was a great scene. Another parallel that we see between the Arkenstone and the ring is that Bilbo is also able to give away both of them.
Yeah. Again, in the Arkenstone, the dragon sickness, like who knows how much of that's, again, like real, actual or not, but Bilbo's just seems very resistant to that sort of clinging to anything, really, anything. It's kind of the opposite of like wanting to hold on, not giving up a single coin. Like he's the type who's like, okay, we'll use this money to protect the rest of it,
Exactly.
He'd be great in charge.
You mean he'd be great with power? Like a ring of power?
Yeah. He's probably the best one for it for now.
There's other people who agree with that. But after Bilbo gives up the Arkenstone, he goes back to Thorin.
Right. And I just thought he needed to, like, in Gandalf, actually, this is one of the few times where I feel like Gandalf and I agree with the safest and best measure, the next move. He's telling Bilbo to get out of there and leave, basically. And I really agree that if it might be best for Bilbo just to get out of there. It is not his scene, to say. Like, it's not where he would normally hang out.
And I get what you're saying, and I think if Bilbo had left, he would probably... I don't think I would have judged him in the wrong if he decided to leave. Mm-hmm. But the story that we see play out is one where Bilbo needed to be there to tell Thorin that he gave away the stone, or his plan would have failed and it would still have resulted in war. Yeah,
because Thorin actually thinks that it's a trick until Bilbo says it isn't. And I think I remember watching that scene. I was thinking, oh, that's really clever of Thorin because there's no way they would have had it,
Right.
Like he figured that out very quickly. You'd expect the paranoid guy to think they're getting in and out somehow, but he's still with his wits enough to know that there's no way that they got in and out to steal the Arkenstone.
Right. I mean, the Arkenstone is lost somewhere in the Horde. How in the world would they have done all of that finding?
Right.
So Bilbo needs to be there to own up to what he did, or his entire plan is pointless.
And then this ends with Thranduil saying they're going to start a fight. And then Thorin promises to destroy them all, kill them or something. And Thorin says, your oath means nothing. I thought that was next level shade.
That is a pretty deep cutting insult. So you had some questions about the really bizarre scene with Legolas and Tauriel sitting up on top of a cliff looking at a giant evil structure. I call this reconstructing Frodo and Sam at the Black Gate.
Yeah, I am completely lost on where Toriel and Legolas are and what they're doing.
So they are in a realm formerly known as Angmar, at a fortress on Mount Gundabad. I don't know that this scene was particularly impactful to me. It really just seemed like it was recreating the scene from the Two Towers at the Black Gate.
So were they creating a diversion? Is that what you mean?
They were spying out the forces. I guess they might have come back with like some scout intel.
Right.
But it didn't seem worth the time that was spent on it. As
a viewer who was this time, I was kind of invested at this point. I really liked the negotiations. It was very tense, and then just this coming up completely like set it back and for no good reason, because all it really showed was they had some war bats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then we jump into the Battle of the Five Armies. I think it's important to realize that the entire Battle of the Five Armies in the book is skipped.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. And I remember that too.
Bilbo is knocked out at the beginning, and the narration skips to when he comes to after the battle has concluded. There is very little description or explanation about precisely what happens in the battle. So all of this next part is movie interpretation, because skipping the battle is going to be a terrible decision for a movie. Of course they need to show the battle. But details about how things go down, who saves whom, what the battle strategies are, it's entirely movie. There's nothing in the books to indicate how the armies moved where, or what weapons they used to attack or defend, or what animals they rode on. Right.
Yeah. And there's some, I feel like the movie did some great and some awful in here, as my notes may have illuminated. It definitely, as it went on, got worse. Is my I'm putting that opinion up top. I thought it started out really strong, though. I really, for the first half of the Battle of the Five Armies, was super into it.
This seems to be a theme with The Hobbit. Starts off good, goes off trail somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're lost, you're lost and confused. Ironfoot showing up, Thorin recognizing it before anybody else. All of this was really great. I really liked seeing the dwarves move. They did have war goats. That was my first question mark. I don't know about that one. I get they're small, so they don't need horses, but I don't know if goats would be my first choice.
Well, I thought Dane Ironfoot's dialogue to Thranduil was great, except that he used the word buggers twice, which is actually a pretty vulgar word.
Yeah, and it's like a Scottish connotation to us Americans, but to a Scottish person, it is very vulgar. Yes. The meaning of that, kind of like, bloody in British is seen as a way higher order swear, and when we use it, it's just to indicate that character is British. Usually, in an American thing, when a character starts saying bloody this or bloody that. At
the risk of a tangent, the difference between these two words is the difference between sacrilege and vulgarity. Bloody is actually a blasphemous, sacrilegious word, whereas buggers is a more just
it's an innuendo for sure.
So as far as the war goats, though, I didn't want to let this one pass.
Right.
I was honestly not sold on the war goats until I saw the chariot. Once I saw the chariot, I was on board with the war goats. The dwarves are very Norse inspired, and seeing the chariot, I was reminded that Thor has a chariot pulled by two goats. And thinking about that, it just really worked for me by the end. That you had these vaguely Norse-inspired dwarves with their war goats pulling their chariots, and it fit right in with Thor and his chariot for me. So the war goats worked.
I just feel like they could have been a little bit more intimidating. They were so cute. They were adorable. Not at all scary.
Fair.
I think scarier looking goats even would have worked better. These ones almost look like Pokemon. I do also, I don't actually remember seeing elves and dwarves fighting ever in any other Lord of the Rings things I've seen.
You mentioned that earlier in the last podcast or two ago. One of them, you mentioned it wasn't common to see it. And so now this is twice that you're seeing it in this movie series.
So from what I remember 2 episodes ago, I think I was commenting it was nice to see why there was so much beef. Like the elves betrayed the dwarves, but they weren't actually on a battlefield, were they?
I think this was in Desolation of Smog when they were fighting like around the barrel scene and around the Elven Kingdom scenes.
Yeah. And I think I blocked out the barrel scene maybe. But like this is like a battle formation versus like 2 groups. So maybe that's kind of why it felt different in my head. Like a whole formation of elves fighting a whole formation of dwarves. I don't know.
Certainly.
But, like, you know, in the Lord of the Rings again, you hear these animosity between them, but you don't see hardly any dwarves. So, and the elves, you know, seem actually kind of nice to Gimli a little bit compared to a lot of the interactions here.
You haven't read the books yet.
Yeah. In the books that might be different, but in the movies, I feel like they're pretty gentle with that rivalry or feud.
Yeah.
I did like. I'm going to try to avoid going blow by blow on this whole Battle of Five Armies, but the goats running over the shields like a ramp. That was like, I just recently heard about this and I thought it was super interesting to see it on the screen, but that was like an actual battlefield maneuver used a lot of times. Like historically it was recorded Alexander the Great did this early on, and that's like how everyone knew he was a great genius, but it was with carts rather than mounts, but it worked great.
That's really interesting.
Yeah So I did like to see that. Thorin is staying up in his castle though, which has to be like horrible in dwarven culture, right?
I imagine Thorin's doing it now.
Yeah. The dwarves and the elves do suddenly change side because of the orcs that show up.
Amazing how that happens.
Yeah, it was really, I like to see that, honestly. Like I hope maybe just in my tone of voice and how quickly but like this is still all exciting to me. I liked this. I did think it was odd that the Lake Town army was hanging back in the city. I feel like they would have been there with the elves, but Bard is with the elves, not with his people. I thought that was odd. And I don't know if it was touched on and I missed it.
I didn't notice it if it was touched on. Mm-hmm. I feel like Lake Town has been beat up enough.
Yeah, that might be just what we could deduce. So the people of Lake Town are getting attacked at the same time. They kind of divert forces, right? I feel like this is kind of where it starts to get like a little bit lost in the weeds. A little bit too much is going on. It's starting to drag on the action, and we're not even really halfway through. But like it starts to drag on at this point personally for me. I don't know what you think too.
Honestly, the whole movie feels like an action scene to me, and I have some statistics on this coming up.
But yeah, from here on out, it's basically just an action scene until the very end, I feel like.
Yeah.
I do feel like it is nice that it shows, I mean, usually just the people of Lake Town, but like how the small folk get caught up in conflict multiple times.
Yeah.
In this scene specifically. And I feel like when this is interspliced, Thorin even says like this line that many die in war, life is cheap. This treasure is worth all the blood we can spend. That's just absolutely awful to me. Like that
it's supposed to be.
Really made me like question everything that I liked about Thorin at all, you know? It's
meant to show how deep he is into his dragon sickness madness, that he can think that way.
Yeah.
Only someone truly mad would say that.
And I also put a note on here that one of the voices echoing in Thorin's head as he's going mad is Gandalf saying, "Take back your homeland." I feel like, again, Gandalf stirs the pot a little bit, like a little bit too much maybe. Like he just does a lot, you know? He's doing too much.
Well, take back your homeland doesn't mean don't pay out your promises.
That's true. Yeah, that's really the issue here.
He did take back his homeland, and now he needs to keep his oath.
And then suddenly Thorin has a change of heart after, it's Balfour who confronts him, or is it Balin?
Balin.
Balin confronts him, and I think that's what was the catalyst for his change of heart, but he suddenly wants to go out and help. I thought it was kind of sudden, and it wasn't very, very clearly connected.
Yeah, and it's things like this that aren't really explained in the book because
this isn't happening. Yeah, there's nothing to go back on.
Yeah, so the movie's got to do something. And what are you going to fill in? Honestly, a change of heart that happens a little too quickly, coming from a lighthearted children's novel where a pep talk from your friend can have that sort of effect, probably isn't the most offensive choice the movie has made to me. I totally hear what you're saying. I'm not saying it couldn't have been done better.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it couldn't have been done better. This one also, with my generous take of saying it comes from a children's book.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem like the worst choice to me.
The other thing is, like, the movie doesn't even make it exactly clear. Like, the scenes aren't straight back to back. And then Thorin just at one moment is, like, ready to go. And this is the last development you see was Balin confronting him. So you kind of have to piece it together. And it just left me feeling a little bit unsure of exactly. I thought they were going to say, like, or, like, mention Thorin had some other, like, straw that broke the camel back that made him realize that something was wrong with what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And it just, I feel like that happened off screen, like him realizing what he's doing wrong. It's just like the next scene, he was ready to go out and fight and do what's right.
Maybe he heard himself talking.
And then I was kind of wondering, I get the principle between why it's important for him to be out there, but like, I didn't get why 13 people would make that big a difference in such a big battlefield until it happened. And the rally to Thorin on the Dwarven side, morale, he's great for keeping people in the fight.
I think it's about here that the movie points out that Thorin is the heir of his grandfather, not his grandfather himself. And I find that particular wording suggestive to casting Thorin and Aragorn in comparison. Mm-hmm. Because there's the quote in the original movie trilogy that Aragorn is the heir of Isildur, not Isildur himself. And I thought that this was a very interesting thought to compare Thorin and Aragorn, but I also find that this thought has been brought up quite too late. This is a thought we should have been thinking about from, like, the beginning of Unexpected Journey to run a comparison between Thorin and Aragorn's leadership throughout the entire movie trilogy, but it's only being brought up now. Mm-hmm.
They are interesting foils too.
Yeah, no, an analysis between Thorin and Aragorn I think would be really interesting, but we don't have time to go back over the entire movie trilogy now that they're bringing it up.
Yeah, they definitely should have somehow struck that chord or made that insinuation sooner.
This quote could have appeared in Bilbo's kitchen.
Yeah.
You have Balin and Thorin talking, and Thorin says that he's not going to fall prey to the madness of his grandfather, and Balin says, of course not. You are the heir of your grandfather, not your grandfather himself. There, woven in, comparison established, first movie, awesome.
That would have been much better. Yeah, that's a very good point about how late into this it is, because we're at the final hour, and they're bringing it up.
It's a great point, but it comes far, far too late.
Yeah, I do like every time Bard, he does this way earlier after Smaug attacks the village, and then again as the people are being attacked again, he offers and asks for men who want to and men who are able. He want to in regards to coming with him, leaving Lake Town. I think he said something to that effect. And then anybody who's able, men who are able to me, like, I like how there's like a volunteer aspect. Bard really warmed up on me in this third movie, and in the second movie, I absolutely dreaded him. So this is really some sort of like causing some sort of cognitive dissonance. Like doesn't feel like the same guy. He seems so cool in this one, and I just thought he was very lame in the second movie.
Character development, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe. So it does get to the goat cart that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And this is when I, like, before I mentioned, like, it was starting to falter. It was getting there. This is when it just felt like this is going on way too long. And it reminded me a lot of the barrel scene. I don't know if it's just because they were traveling down a river, but like, if it's just starting to feel very gratuitous.
Certainly. And I do have more to say about I'll call it the chariot scene, than just about the goats. I did like the goats on the chariot, but that was about all I liked about it. Just like you, it does feel very extended, and just far too much action. But honestly, I was feeling action fatigue far before this.
Yeah.
So this scene did not stand out to me as a prime point of action fatigue personally. But I do see the similarity in the travelingness of the scene between this and the barrel scene. And it's actually the extended traveling chariot scene that got this movie the R rating that it has.
Yeah, there was some pretty gruesome depictions of orc mayhem and murder.
I might have been sold on the goats, but this was too gratuitous.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, maybe everybody has a different tolerance point, but I feel like I have a pretty high tolerance, and this is when it hit mine. If it wasn't for this podcast, I'd be fast forward till it looked like all the fighting was done. Like, that's how bad I felt about this part of this movie.
And that's not how you should feel in a Lord of the Rings film.
No. There are still little specks of things that pop up I enjoyed, but yeah, this is when after this until the very end, I'm just, it lost it for me. Thandriel, one example, like in the next scene, Thandriel sees the elvish dead. That must be extra grueling because elves don't naturally die, like, of old age. And I feel like that might be a coping mechanism a human would use on a battlefield as well. Everyone dies eventually, but that's not true for elves.
Yeah. And this is a great point about mortality and immortality. The elves have seen a lot of battles over the millennia. There have been a lot of battles that have been fought. Mm-hmm. But this is an excellent point. And this is actually something that I think about when the elves show up at Helm's Deep in the Two Towers movie. The elves that are dying at Helm's Deep in the movie are elves who probably never foresaw that they were going to die in some human keep. The elves don't show up in the book, but the movie elves are sacrificing their lives in a way that they probably never foresaw.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being an elven soldier like that. Sure, ultimately everybody would be at risk, but like putting yourself on the front lines like that just would, it's wild to me if you didn't have to already risk your life just existing, you know?
For treasure, no less.
God, yeah.
For your king's treasure, you're not going to get it.
No. Yeah, it's boggles the mind a bit to me. So it is starting to wrap up here. It is getting the players to the final scene. The dwarves are in this cart to get to this mountain, so they arrive there. Philly gets killed. I feel like he was done dirty, Philly especially. He was hardly a character at all. He existed just to die in this scene, pretty much.
I mean, that's how he was in the book, too. Philly and Killy both die in the book.
Yeah, I did forget about that. I remember Thorin's death, but I thought the rest of the dwarves survived. But again,
Philly and Killy die off screen.
Yeah.
You're just told they're dead.
It is, and I do remember Thorin's death being shocking to me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will discuss Thorin's death later on in the podcast, but Philly's death actually served as a very thought-provoking incident for me. Mm-hmm. Philly's death feels shocking in the context of this being originally a lighthearted children's novel. If you're watching this movie thinking, oh, this is fundamentally a children's story, R-rated scenes aside, Philly's death feels out of place because it's the first really permanent consequence a quote-unquote main character has had.
Yeah.
In the book, Philly's death happens off-screen, like I said, and this shows something. But having any of the dwarves die, reading Thorin's death scene, any of these things feels grown up to me compared to where the book started. Mm-hmm. Even if it's off-screen.
Right.
The Lord of the Rings has a similar narrative arc. It starts off in a lighter, more carefree style, and then matures into something very grand by the end of The Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. So noticing this parallel in narrative style actually makes me appreciate the Hobbit book enough that I think I might like it this time around.
Interesting. I'm so excited to reread that book and read The Lord of the Rings the first time.
This genuinely makes me excited to read The Hobbit for the first time since I was first reading it and was disappointed by it. I want to keep track of the frequency of the narrator fourth wall breaks that I said I didn't like.
Right. Yeah.
I want to see how often the narrator breaks the fourth wall, and if as the book gets more mature, if that happens less and less.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will. I genuinely need to find this out.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting experiment.
Yes. So Feely's death was very important to me, actually.
Yeah. No, Feely and Keely dying, again, I didn't remember that specifically, but just the way that at the end, I remember the book feeling, again, it was anticlimactic because Smaug dies off screen, and then also you miss the whole battle, and also the guy is dead, and like you just missed it all. And like part of that felt like really like, oh, like heavy and real to me, you know?
Yeah.
I remember the sense, and I don't know about like the narrative style, obviously either. It sounds like we both definitely need a refresher on the book, which we'll get to eventually. But like it is very it is very exciting to have these sort of things in mind while we're reading it.
Definitely.
It's like they're like mini like missions or quests or side quests while we're reading it. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, I am now looking forward to reading The Hobbit, and this is what I want to watch for, among other things. And I am very hopeful that I will like The Hobbit this time through, looking at how the narrative style of The Hobbit parallels that of The Lord of the Rings.
Okay. And so in this next note, I'd mention that Legolas and Thorin fight scene are cool once they are merged. That this implies very heavily that everything Legolas does before he's nearby Thorin, I feel like is extremely like hard for me to watch as well. Him riding around the Warbat was just weird. A lot of this just didn't feel great to me. But they start to like have this interesting, like their fights are going on next to each other, but they can back each other up a little bit. That was a little bit fun for me. Like I'm just trying to find the diamonds in the rough here.
Someone has to. Well, while you're finding diamonds, I'm going to find some rough.
You got plenty.
Some people object to Legolas on a skateboard at Helm's Deep. Some people object to minecarts in the desolation of Smaug. But personally, I think the stunts have gone too far when Legolas can run faster up falling rocks than the rocks are falling. Mm-hmm. This is where it loses me.
Yeah.
I got to give it my generous take because that's what we do here.
Mm-hmm.
My generous take would have to be that the elves just have a special relationship to the world, the same way Legolas walks on the snow on Carathras. Don't question it. But these two still feel different to me somehow.
Right.
Legolas walking on the snow felt more subtle. It felt artistic. This doesn't.
Uh-huh.
And also walking on the snow happened in the books.
Mm-hmm. And none of this happened in the books.
None of this was specified in the books. Legolas wasn't in the book, much less running up rocks falling faster than gravity.
Now, I feel like a little bit of this is editing. It just really looked wonky. I feel like if they made it like a blur or a fade, it would have looked a little bit less odd, maybe. I feel like that definitely like showing him actually step up on the rocks like they're stairs just didn't look cool. And then like if you think about it from a logical perspective, like you said, like those are free falling objects that he's running up. Like it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't look cool. But why?
Yeah. So this is where the special effects lost me.
Yeah, I feel like if they did something that made it look even more magical, it might have worked. Maybe for me. Personally.
But as we begin to lose the last shreds of hope for this movie, the eagles arrive and bring you catastrophe.
Yes.
The end of the battle.
Yeah, that is definitely why I was excited to see them. I knew the fighting was done. I think, honestly, this might be the generous take to end all generous takes, but maybe the movie dragging on with the action was on purpose so we would feel so excited to see those eagles save the day.
I gotta go with it. Well,
and that was the Battle of the Five Armies.
That was the end of the battle. Next, let's talk about what I call Grima 2.0.
That was Alfred.
He's just another worm tongue.
Yeah, he really, and I even made this note. Like we both came to this independently of each other.
Yes.
Really funny. Sleazy advisors aren't a fan of Gandalf, though, that's for sure.
No, they're really not.
I mean, it would be a cushy job, just like telling lies to a king. I could do it.
I mean, you saw Wormtongue's fate.
Yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't work out for me in the Tolkien verse for sure.
Yep. And that's where we live. We live in Middle Earth, just a modern version of it. But Alfred has a whole series of scenes throughout the battle.
During the battle, his entire arc is like trying to not fight, basically.
Being a coward.
Being a coward.
And a thief.
I do feel like, maybe also a hot take, I feel like socioculturally, Alfred probably makes more sense than a lot of the women they're hiding away to keep out of combat. He seems like he seems like a terrible liability.
Or you send him out there so that you don't have to welcome him home.
Yeah, that's true. You just have to not worry about saving him, which is awful. But maybe for him, you could turn a blind eye to something like that. So I personally can respect him being a coward. I feel like many would be, but being a thief, escaping with the gold is definitely something else.
Yeah, I mean, there's cowardice out of weakness, and to a certain extent, it wouldn't even be something that I would consider cowardice, just overwhelming fear.
Right.
Things that are beyond a person's ability to cope with.
Yeah.
But he has a big choice with the gold. It's not something that he can't control. Right,
exactly. And then, so the next scene, it kind of has Gandalf showed fighting you said he's a troll? I thought it was a big orc, something. And I
thought it was a troll. I don't know.
I don't know. All I know is why I don't know why Gandalf hasn't been more present in this battle. He's kind of, it makes sense, like, where he would be, like, with the people of Lake Town over in the very front. But, like, I just feel like he's a very minor character for, the wizard.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about this before, and I think you're right. I can't really remember Gandalf doing a whole lot in the battle.
Yeah, like, I should not be saying where has Gandalf been this whole time if the point of the movie is to show, like, because that's what you feel reading the book is, where's Gandalf the whole time? But the point of the movie is to show Gandalf where he was. So in the end, they still kind of fell back on Gandalf just isn't there to save the day.
But which fits with the Hobbit tropes anyway.
Yeah, but, like, he was there, so I don't get it. Again, yeah. Alfred's death, though, was fittingly humiliating. I liked that part.
I did like Alfred's death. In the scene, Gandalf is struggling to use his staff against what I thought was a troll when...
Might be a troll. I think you're right.
When Grima 2.0's greed sets off the engine, which hurtles him to death, and Gandalf is saved. I really like this as an instance of evil undoing itself. It's not only evil undoing itself, it's the evil he did punishing him for that. Like, it is the gold itself.
And more than just undoing Alfred, he also took out another problem. So it's like,
double whammy.
Double whammy. There you go. Yeah.
It seemed very fitting to me. And I believe this was also an extended scene.
Oh, really?
So it was another something that I thought was important and added more good to the movie than bad.
Right. And also, like, it showed where Gandalf was. Like, if this was cut, I don't know where, like, he just would have been gone the whole time.
Yeah.
So our next topic here is Kili and Toriel.
Yeah, what I called the Kili and Toriel scandal.
Yeah.
So, following that whole arc throughout this battle, I noticed that Kili is incredibly recovered for not having been in Rivendell and healed by Elrond after his Morgul wound.
Yeah, that is a quick turnaround time there.
Yeah. Frodo took so long to heal from it.
Yeah, no, it really, what you brought to my attention last time, the Morgul blank also being a common trope, makes me worried because it's like, again, like in the first movie, the Morgul wound is like, throughout the rest of the movie, it's like something that never sets right, never heals, it's like,
absolutely.
And here it's just like a temporary setback. They should have just been a regular wound, if anything.
Make it a really bad wound that gets infected.
So there was one scene where Kili does speak Dwarvish to Toriel when trying to convince her to stay. I liked a bit. And it kind of, other than that, everything else in their between them was inoffensive to me. And I think they turned it around a little bit in this movie compared to the second one, where every time it was on screen, I was rolling my eyes.
I am glad that this was inoffensive to you. I do not share that. I am incredibly offended.
Inoffensive isn't really even the best. Like, I didn't love it. It just didn't. The last movie, it took me out of my enjoyment, and this time it's moved on. It passed. It was fine.
Oh. I am so upset. Their dialogue was so painful. It was so cringy. Tariel's dialogue about love. Ugh. And Thranduil is ready to commit the fourth kinslaying over this. There's been 3 instances in history where elves have killed elves, and Thranduil is going to threaten Tariel's life for the 4th instance of this in all of their history because she had a bad speech. I mean, I'm really upset about this, but that's overreacting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize the historical context behind that, but oof, that is pretty rough.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed in Thranduil's dialogue was that he mentions that Aragorn is with the Rangers in the north. And I was so disappointed when I heard this because that shoots a hole in my idea that young Aragorn is in Rivendell and he's getting classes on Kingsfoil.
Yeah, sometimes these references that are like shoehorned in really mess with a lot, you know.
Yeah.
They mess with some timelines that you can construct in your head for no good reason, just so that, like, it just felt like they wanted to say Rangers, talk about the Rangers.
Yeah. And can we just talk again about how bad Tariel's dialogue is and how upset I am about this?
Yeah. Toriel had potential to be a great character, and I don't like that her only characteristic by the end was she liked Killy. Like,
yeah.
That's not a good way to write a female character if you wanted to make more female characters. I'm sorry.
Why does it hurt so much? Because it was real.
Yeah. There were parts that I thought in this one it was livened up a bit, but I didn't have as much context as you. And I feel like that's the problem with this thing is Lord of the Rings, anything in the Middle Earth realm, the more you learn about it, the better it's supposed to be. Like, it's supposed to be like, if you have more context, you get it better, and then you get the nuances. That's what I like about, like, and that's how everything felt in the trilogy for the, I remember specifically in the second movie, The Two Towers, like, there was some things you were telling me about the Ents, and the more I understood, the more interesting it was. And just peppered all throughout the, you know, Lord of the Rings movies, and I'm assuming the books too. And that's what good world building is. So if you having more knowledge about this world makes these scenes worse, that is a very bad adaptation for a world like this.
That's a great criteria. I love how you explained that.
Yeah. So, like, if, like, I enjoyed this because a little, or enjoyed is stretching it, but I didn't mind it so much because I didn't know better, right? Like, kinslaying and elves has happened 3 times before this, and all of a sudden over, like, a little fling and some bad dialogue, like you said. I mean, maybe the dialogue was that bad, though.
I mean, I think it was awful, and I think that's an overreaction.
The next point, so this is kind of, those were all interspliced during the battle, those last few points, and then we're kind of at the end of it all. Right, Thorin's death is after the Eagles come and save everybody from the orcs.
Yeah.
And that's our next topic.
Yep. So all these plot threads have come together, the battle is over, and Thorin's on his deathbed.
Yeah, and I feel like, compared to Fili and Killy, his death was cathartic and necessary for his character arc, and I really enjoyed watching it in a way.
It's definitely a moving scene. I felt that it was compared to Boromir's death, the way it was filmed. That's
a very good comparison. You know, going back on the Aragorn comparison with Thorin earlier, he has a lot of both of those characters in him. He kind of does also have some Boromir streaks to him.
What if Boromir was trying for the throne of Gondor?
Yeah, exactly. It's like if Boromir was in Aragorn's place, it's like a very good spot for him. It would have been fun to like think about that throughout the whole movie, but again, they didn't bring that line up until.
Yeah, maybe we should have had these parallels before the final scenes of the movie.
Yeah,
I don't know.
and so that wraps up the actual battles. The rest is, well, the next category.
Yeah, so then Bilbo has been on his adventure. He comes back to the Shire, there and back again.
Mm-hmm.
Right before he leaves Gandalf, though, he straight up lies to Gandalf about not having the ring anymore.
Yeah.
This whole lying thing is incredibly suspicious. And also not alluded to in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, it would have been a very good scene if Gandalf made a little joke about Bilbo lying to him about the ring at some point in the Fellowship of the Ring.
But Gandalf didn't do that because this is an adaptation from the movies. Bilbo never lied to Gandalf at the end like this. I mean, Bilbo told lies surrounding the ring, but this specifically was not one of them.
And knowing the greater power of the ring kind of like really does, like, it's like a big exclamation point when he says he lost it somewhere on the battlefield. It's like, like, well, oh, like that. Like I could picture like just like anybody watching it, that should be like literally over their head, like just
every red flag,
big problems. Yeah, and I do like how they portrayed it though. Like even though with the context, it's like, oh no. They made it seem like just a silly little joke Bilbo was playing with the way the dialogue was delivered and everything.
Yeah.
Again, the context made it a bigger deal, right?
Yeah.
I do like that it showed why Bilbo did not like the Saxville's Baggins. That was one of my first questions after the prologue is what he has against them. And now we have come full circle and I see why he was unhappy that they were around for his birthday.
Yep. We don't like the Sackville Bagginses.
No.
But I did like the chance to revisit the contract again. I liked how
as proof of his identity, he has to use the contract. You mean that scene?
Yeah, I liked how he had to pull out his contract to demonstrate his identity. Not in the book. Loved the scene. I thought it was very cute to see that again, and like you said, bring it full circle.
Yeah, I actually kind of like the ending a bit. Thorin's death on. There was mostly good from there.
Yes, I did like it a lot. So let us bring our analysis full circle and talk about some concluding thoughts. I mentioned earlier that this entire movie feels like an action scene to me. So I made sure to clock all of the action scenes and add up all of the runtime. I got 59 minutes of action scene, which was actually less than I expected. I
think the best scenes in this movie obviously were not the action scenes. They easily could have cut all of them in half. That it should have been easily a half hour of action scenes if you were counting it like this. Yeah.
The movie runtime was 2 hours and 24 minutes. Mm-hmm. So this works out to 41% of the movie being action.
I feel like if we're just looking at the non-action scenes and the non-love triangle, not love triangle, but the affair, take out those and it's all really solid. I really liked Thorin's descent into madness. I thought that was very enjoyable. Mm-hmm. I really liked the negotiations even too. I thought it was pretty tense and I really liked the non-action scene parts of this movie, but that's, well, technically a majority, but barely.
I mean, if you throw in the love triangle scenes, it could be 50%.
Yeah. And then also any scene really with, I kind of griped about it in the second movie. We made sense, but like Legolas scenes, none of them did anything for me really great. Even the non-action ones.
Let's throw in that Black Gate scene.
Yeah, that Black Gate scene was definitely just why. It was very odd. But, I feel like and we'll split the difference on that action scene with Galadriel. It wasn't great, but there was it wasn't a full action scene like the battles. I feel like there was some exposition going on too.
I did count that as an action scene, though. I felt it was still fighting.
It was mostly fighting.
Yeah,
I don't blame you, but I'm just saying, like,
it also wasn't really long, though, I don't think.
Yeah. There needs to be some action in a movie, but there's a point where like
I'm not complaining that action exists. I just thought that it felt like way too much. And like I said, I was honestly surprised it was as little as it was. I was expecting this to be over 50% action, and I was surprised it came under 50%.
The stretch from the last stretch there, from starting at 1 hour and 35 minutes, could have been not that. Like, it's what does that add up to then? Like about a half hour. So half the action almost.
Yeah, is the battle of the Five Armies.
The Battle of the Five Armies. I get that you need to show the Battle of the Five Armies, but you do not need 30 minutes of straight action with little to no breaks in it at all, you know? It just wasn't, it should have been half the amount of time, I really think.
Yep. That and the barrel scene.
Yeah, the barrel scene was not great either.
There's a lot to be disappointed about. Well, that concludes our rings. Now let's do our things. This movie did have some good quotes.
Yeah. I liked Bard had a speech after the town attempted to lynch Alfred for being there with the master when they were fleeing. The quote, I wrote it down actually. I went back a few times to get it exactly right because I didn't know how accessible this movie would be compared to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So he said, "We must look to our own, to the sick and helpless. Those who can stand, tend to the sick and the wounded, and those with the strength left follow me." I liked it. I don't know. That's when Bard, like he was okay escaping from jail, taking out Smaug, but that's when I was like, this man definitely top-notch leader quality.
Absolutely. It's a good speech. I like it.
Yeah, roused me a bit. I was a fan.
Yeah. I have a quote from Bard as well, when he said, "We must salvage what we can." And I had to sit back and say, you know, so true given the state of this movie right now.
Right, yeah.
Got to salvage what we can from this movie.
Yeah, I feel like I did, but man, it was painful in between.
I really liked Galadriel's quote. She said, "You have no power here, servant of Morgoth. You are nameless, faceless, formless. Go back to the void from whence you came." She says this to Sauron as she's banishing him. And I think it's the "from whence" that really seals this quote. Like, it starts off great, and it ends really strong with that "from whence you came." It's just, I love the sound of that.
Yeah, I really like Galadriel. Every time she's doing something, I'm always like, yes. Mm-hmm. I felt the same way, I think it was in the Fellowship of the Ring when she started to, like, scare Frodo from giving her the ring. Like, it was a similar vibe to this, where she goes, like, completely in her power and, like, shows how terrifying she could be.
Yeah.
Love it.
Another quote I liked was from Thranduil, where he says, "The heirlooms of my people are not lightly forsaken." It just sounds good to me.
Yeah.
It sounds like a nice, concise, flowing quote.
Yeah. Yeah, Thranduil definitely had a way with words.
Yeah. It's good writing. This is an example of really good writing. "Why does it hurt so much?" is an example of not good writing.
Or your quote from the first An Unexpected Journey, where sickness spreads, bad things follow. I think it was something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
Bad things follow was the part.
Yeah.
Bad things. Come on.
Got some inconsistent writing here.
I liked Bilbo saying, "I may be a burglar, but I like to think I'm an honest one." This is charming. That Bilbo charm.
I had this quote marked as well. It's just such a nice quote. I really liked it.
Yeah, that one might be my favorite.
Yeah. Well, I have to go with Thorin's death quote as being my favorite quote. And even though I try to select quotes from the movies, this quote has been changed from the book. In the movie, what Thorin says is, "If more people valued home above gold, this world would be a merrier place." It's not quite like the book, and I do think it loses some of its beauty for the changes, but this line still packs a punch, and I still really like it.
Yeah, it's a good quote. I don't know the book quote offhand, so I'd be interested to compare, as always.
The book quote is, "If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world."
That is much better.
I think what I most like about it is the enumeration of food and cheer and song.
Yeah.
Food and cheer and song is what the movie is saying, make home.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just, it loses like the lyrical value of the quote, you know? When you don't have that rhythm to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, the book quote better, but still a good quote.
Absolutely. Still a great quote. Still gotta love Thorin understanding that lesson by the end. So that brings us to the end of all things. JD, who was your favorite character not in Thorin's company?
I really like Thandriel, like, as kind of a, like, is he a villain? Is he on the good guy's side? He's a gray character, and I really like him. He's just barely, like, I feel like, on the dividing line of good. Like, if he was just a tinge darker, he would be a villain.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he came pretty close to killing his own kin there.
Yeah. Yeah, over the terrible love plot.
I mean,
Thandriel was I
do understand.
He was a very complex and interesting character in this film, I thought, in by the end of it, in the third movie. There's a lot to say about him. I like him a lot, too.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with Gandalf. He's not really part of the company.
No, he's not on the contract.
Nope, it's just the dwarves and Bilbo. So I'm going to go with Gandalf because he's a good, solid character throughout the entire trilogy. A lot of our complaints don't stem around Gandalf.
No, yeah, in this film trilogy, he definitely was always a blessing for the most part.
Yeah. So who was your least favorite character not in Thorin's company?
Alfred's pretty easy to hate as a person. He did have a satisfying death, but that's all he really gave. And he did kind of feel deprived of Grima, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Alfred is up there for me, too. Like I said, though, I really do like his death. It is very satisfying.
It's enough to bring him into not least favorite.
I have a hard time putting him in least favorite. I really want to like Tariel, but I feel like she's poorly executed at almost every scene. The actress is great, and the idea for her character is solid, in my opinion, but she just never works. So I think I'm going to have to go with Tariel.
Yeah, I could see that. It's sad because you see the flits of greatness, but it's just never came to anything that was... She didn't have any very memorable, interesting scenes, and it feels, again, like she was just, as awesome as they tried to make her seem, just like an excess, like something for Keeley to be interested in.
Yeah.
It's sad.
So perhaps these will be easier questions. Which one was your favorite movie?
My favorite one, easily, was An Unexpected Journey.
Same.
That one felt like it almost belonged, I think I said at the end, not quite with the Lord of the Rings, but right up, like it's like right behind them. It feels like it part of the original trilogy to me.
I agree. I will actually watch An Unexpected Journey somewhat regularly for pure enjoyment because I really like the movie. I will almost never watch Desolation of Smaug or Battle of the Five Armies. That's just because I don't like them as much. What was your least favorite movie?
My least favorite was Desolation of Smaug. It's a toss-up between the last two, but I feel like the Battle of Five Armies had the scenes, like, I just really like the scenes that I liked in it, and I didn't feel that way about this Desolation of Smaug. I enjoyed a lot of it, but I didn't really like much at all. If that makes sense. Like there's a difference between finding something kind of entertaining and like finding something truly interesting. And there's parts of the Battle of Five Armies I found truly interesting, and I can't say that for the Desolation of Smaug.
That's a fair reason. I'm going to have to go the other way, though. I'm going to have to say my least favorite movie was Battle of the Five Armies because I found the first half of Desolation of Smaug to be very good. Mm. It fell off either at where the elves show up or at the barrel ride. And after that, the second half was much less enjoyable to me. But that first half, was really good. Like, we got to the first half of the movie, and I was looking at my notes saying, this is a great movie. Why do I hate this movie? And then I was reminded why I hated the movie. Mm-hmm. But I never felt that way about Battle of the Five Armies. I never paused it and picked it up another evening and thought, oh, this is a great movie. Why do I hate this?
Yeah, and I feel like part of this, too, is just I have a slightly higher action tolerance. I was worn out from the action scenes far later than you were, as we discussed earlier. So I feel like some of the action scenes I really liked, too, but just Thorin's character in the keep I thought was truly interesting. It did feel like Lord of the Rings, a character going corrupt to a magic artifact.
Yeah.
It felt very on point with the themes of Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Desolation of Smaug, I other than the last half, like I could totally see that first half being strong enough to put it above, though, is where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Like it's a toss up, which one is kind of like, because, they fail in different ways. It's kind of hard to compare them. They're both, what sucks about them, I feel like, is different a little bit.
Yeah.
And what's good about them is way different, too.
And you have a good reason for your ranking as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely respect picking the Battle of Five Armies as your least favorite movie. Easily. I could, hands down, there was some parts that were just painful to watch.
Yeah, and I think the parts that were painful in Battle of the Five Armies sounded like they might be more painful to me than they were to you.
Yeah, definitely.
The pain is a little bit more acute. So, what is one thing that you would change about these movies if you could? You got to pick one.
Can I go second this time? I'm sorry. I want to hear your example first.
You're on to me. I think I will go with fewer action scenes.
Yeah, it would be a very easy fix. Okay, my one change, I think this honestly would hands down fix the Battle of Five Armies. Make Toriel an interesting character. Hands down. I think
Toriel's storyline.
Yeah, give her something other than being a love interest, and maybe just sweep that away completely.
That was another contender I was thinking of. I was trying to decide, was it Toriel or the action? And I figured the action would have fewer ripple effects. Yeah,
that's true. I could see where you're coming from that. And honestly, like a half hour straight of like fighting with very little else happening is just too much. Just way too much.
Yeah, and the barrel sequence. So, let's discuss where we're headed in the podcast from here. Mm-hmm. JD, you wanted to do a special.
Yeah, so I thought after finishing the Hobbit Trilogy, it would be fun to compare to the animated 1977 film, which I've also never seen, so that fits well within the podcast theme.
And I thought that if we were going to be doing the animated Hobbit, that we should also do the animated Lord of the Rings and Return of the King. So Rankin Bass were the creators for the animated Hobbit and the Return of the King. Ralph Bakshi was the creator for the animated Lord of the Rings. Together, these kind of make something of a set. They weren't intended to.
Oh, really? I thought they were.
Bakshi ran out of money, as I understand, to finish his movie. And I could be wrong here, but Rankin Bass made The Return of the King to finish it off. Oh. So The Hobbit and The Return of the King are done in the same style, but The Lord of the Rings in the middle is done in a very different animation style, and it doesn't actually conclude. Eesh. Therefore, I think if we pair all these up together anyway, it will give a nice cohesive set of story, and we'll have to see whether this will be a 1 episode or 2 episode special, how long we want to talk about all these.
Yeah.
After that, I want to do a special. Mm-hmm. There's a particular episode of a show that I am otherwise not familiar with. The show is called Kif. It's on Disney+. It's a kids show. And there's a particular episode of it called Lore of the Ringlight. And to call this an adaptation would be a stretch of the word adaptation. It would be better described as inspired by or maybe riffing on an adaptation. And I was really intrigued by this. I thought this was a really good application of The Lord of the Rings. This particular application is one that is near and dear to my heart, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how important I think this application is in the real world.
I am so excited for that too, because I could just tell there is going to be, this is going to be, it would be too far to call it an Agnes hot take.
The entire episode is something of an Agnes hot take.
Episode, Agnes hot take. Yes. I'm excited.
And so, yeah, I'm really excited about that one as well. So we're going to have these two specials. We're not quite sure how we're going to divide them up or piece them together yet. So you'll have to be surprised as we are surprised. But we want to cover all that. And the next thing we plan to do is to take a look at the Amazon series Rings of Power.
Right. Which I'm excited for that too. I mean, I'm just really hyped for all of this.
Me too. I'm also excited to hear what your takes are on Rings of Power. It's a very controversial show. You
know, I'm not trying to do these generous takes. I always do my best to find what I try to meet a work where it's at, and it does me good most of the time. I end up enjoying a lot more things, which I feel like helps me out.
I agree with you.
Doesn't always work out. Sometimes some things are just bad.
I'm very interested to hear what your takes and your generous takes and your less generous takes are on Rings of Power. I'm just very interested to hear whether you like it or not.
Yeah, we'll see.
I guess we will. So, next we have a question. A question that needs answering.
It's been a while since we had a question.
Well, the dragon tamers from the west, but not directly west, more like southwest, but a little bit north from there, so more like west-southwest. What they want to know is, out of all the dragons in the Lord of the Rings lore, which one is your favorite and why?
Smaug.
Good choice from the one dragon you know about.
That is the one Lord of the Rings dragon I know about, yes.
So there are only 4 named dragons in the entire Legendarium, and only 2 have speaking roles. Smaug and Glaurung are the dragons with speaking parts, and Calagon the Black and Scatha the Worm are only mentioned. Therefore, I am going to pick Glaurung, and we can look forward to his appearance in the Silmarillion.
Smaug is a good choice. He's one of my favorite depictions of dragons, generally speaking, too.
And Smaug is a great choice, but since I figured you were probably going to go with Smaug,
yeah,
then I'm going to go with the other talking dragon.
Yeah, they don't make me try to defend why Glaurung is great, because
no,
it would not be pretty. This is my first time hearing of him.
For sure. But when we get to the Silmarillion, we'll get to see who Glaurung is. He is a delicious dragon.
I love a good dragon.
So I have some follow-up questions for you, JD.
Okay.
Who is your favorite member of Thorin's company, and why is it Bilbo?
Well, easily. Because Bilbo, for me, was the whole, this movie might have been better if we just did what The Hobbit did and just focused on Bilbo and cut everything else out. I get why they didn't, and it was a bold choice, but just Bilbo was the whole thing.
He was awesome. Yeah. Maybe the movie would have been better just for focusing on its strength. Martin Freeman.
Yep. So easy then, right?
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Who was your favorite dwarf in Thorin's company? And you can count Thorin.
I was about to ask. Thorin, favorite dwarf, though. Thorin was my favorite character in Thorin's company. But
he's a dwarf.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to say, is he the best dwarf? No. If he wouldn't be the best person, but he is the most interesting character.
Okay.
Does that make sense? He's kind of one of the worst dwarves in Thorin's company. He's a bad dwarf. He's
bad at being a dwarf, but he's your favorite character.
Yes.
Yes. No, the intention of the question was to be that distinguishing dwarf from Bilbo.
Yeah, he's my favorite dwarf.
Yes.
Which is how you worded it. He's my favorite of the dwarves. For sure. I really, anytime the movie was slow, other than Bilbo, Thorin kind of helped drag it through.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to go with Beaufort. He's the one who let Bilbo go on the gate wall.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He had that really nice extended scene, and that really brought a lot of depth to an otherwise faceless dwarf from the books, like I was mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. And I think that the movie did a great job personalizing him. It's just something I really wanted to call out that was really well done.
Yeah.
I want to give props to this movie where it did something well, and that was something that really impressed me. And Beaufort has a warm spot in my heart because of this movie.
I am happy with that, too. Like, the movie, we mentioned in the first episode, depicting 13 characters at all, not easy.
Yeah. And I think the movie did a great job with this, and Beaufort is the poster child for a success story of personalizing that faceless dwarf.
Right. Yeah, very good point.
So that brings us to the end of our podcast.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty Hobbit thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful to your support.
And a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.